All right. Welcome to the Hip Hop Hustle podcast. We are back for another week. I'm excited about my current guest. I should have asked how I say his name because I'm probably going to fuck it up, but I think it's Rahn Harper, or is it Ryan? Because I know your name's Ryan. So do you pronounce it Rahn or Ryan?
This is like a Nardwar interview already. He's hitting me with the government name right away, I'm sure he's going to bring up my aunts and my uncles. No, I'm just kidding. It is Ron. Yeah, it's just it might look a little more intimidating than it is, but just Ron. Yep, Ron
Yeah.
Harper.
Rahn Harper. So I got it. I should have just backed myself in and owned it, but it's probably better not to fuck it up during an interview,
Yeah,
and then
that's
at the
true.
end you have to correct me. But Rahn Harper came through, or he's here with me right now. Amazing, dope artist. He's had a fantastic 2024. Lovers and Enemies side A came out. You've got an acoustic version that came out. You've got singles that came out. Was it
Yeah.
Seattle, Takers, Never Sober, Alchemy, man? You've had an awesome year. Like when I was looking through, I was like, fuck, you've been busy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it because sometimes I feel like I'm not as busy as I want to be and feel like it's easy to feel behind schedule when you're always dropping songs. But yeah, I appreciate it, man. It's been a big year. Been working on the Lovers and Enemies album for years. So happy to just have that out in the world. And I'll be dropping side B before this year ends. So right now, kind of just taking a moment to gear up for the rest of that. The music is done. But kind of getting the promotional side of things, all, the rollouts, all those things lined up right now. So
Yeah. Well, you release a lot of music. So you release regularly all the time. I feel like you release albums, you release singles. How do you manage to keep a schedule of that? Because that back piece of what you said just then of like getting ready for a release, getting ready for like the promo, how does that all
yeah.
fit when you're dropping all the time?
I think that a lot of times I'm kind of creating different styles of songs at the same time. Because if my goal is to make a bunch of songs that kind of have a specific feeling, I can't necessarily go to the studio and execute that feeling every single time. So maybe if there's parts of the Lovers and Enemy album that have more somberness to them, I'm going to bounce back and forth and make something that's I'm almost on the opposite end. So I think that helps me crank out a lot of music because typically I'll write maybe a small EP or a couple of singles that feel different while I'm working on a concept. So that way I can kind of put out a lot of music.
I see. This is the weird thing to me about people like yourself is your ability to switch and change. So you're like working on something creatively different, and then you've got something else so different in terms of sound, and you're like, oh, while I'm working on this, I'm also working on that, and the ability to
Yeah.
just switch your brain into that other sound, like that has always mesmerized me in terms of the ability to do that because I think most people struggle with just being able to be like, I'm gonna compartmentalize and then just go straight into something else.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think even in my own artistry, the pendulum is always swinging, right? If I'm making a bunch of somber songs, it's only a matter of time before I'm going to want to go on a spree of making something that feels like it's in the opposite headspace. I think I'm somebody that definitely feels that full spectrum of emotions, and so once I'm kind of spoken my truth on one aspect of the spectrum, I'm going to want to jump to the other. And I think it honestly helps me not fall into so much of like a writer's block or kind of saying the same things over and over again. And a lot of times when you go into the studio and think, okay, I'm going to make the sad song today. Ironically, you end up making like this up tempo bop that you and your buddies can't stop dancing to. And so I've kind of learned through time, I just keep showing up. And even if my goal was to make a song in a specific genre, if I'm being called to something else, I might miss my biggest hit because I was determined to make a certain type of thing, but maybe that day that wasn't the vibe. So whatever we're feeling in the studio, me and the producers, I feel like we just try to let ourselves just really run with it.
So how do you find that balance? Because I think music is one of these things of like you try to be intentional with what you're trying to deliver, but you're also trying to stay free enough to not let it restrict you. So how do you find a balance between that and then you've obviously got to write your music and you've got to like do it. Yeah, I just as you said that I was like I don't that balance must be pretty difficult to find.
Yeah, I think it is. And you hear certain people like Rick Rubin, like don't ever consider the audience, don't ever consider your own thoughts. You need to just free flow and create. And I think that's true to an extent. I think every once in a while you want to consider, okay, well, my goal is to do this. So I want to kind of at least stay in the parameters of hitting that goal. but then letting yourself be free within that space. And it's a difficult balance. I think I do it better some days than others. I think it's easy to let the idea of something seep into your head too much. And you think, no, it's got to be like this. But then you zoom back later and you're like, but if I get too fixated, maybe I'm actually missing something cooler. So it really is an interesting process. And even for artists, I really think changes day to day, year to year. I certainly know it has for me.
Yeah. Yeah. See, this is why I love talking to people like you, because I'm like, as you describe it, I don't make my own music. So I'm only like peering through the window to the house that you have, and you're like showing me like the room in there, and you're taking me through, and I'm just like, there is so much more that goes into being a musician than anyone ever originally thinks. Like everyone, I'm sure, is just like, I'm just gonna rock up to a studio and make music. But then as you get into the weeds of it, you're like, oh no, there is so much complexity, because you do have to take into account, what are the goals? What is my audience expecting? What did I drop last time? What am I dropping this time?
Right.
All of that.
And also not considering that too much, right? Because if we're in the studio thinking, oh, well, my fans responded great to this song last time, my fans, even if they might think they want to, they don't want me to make the same song 10, 15, 20 times in a row. And I think that I would get sick of that as the artist too. So you want to ride that line of knowing your fans, knowing what to expect a little bit, but also you surprising them and you changing. And I certainly know with other artists, when they change and mature to a different sound, sometimes the way they've changed and matured actually resonates with me and my changes too. So it really is amazing kind of watching that arc, both as a fan and as somebody who's kind of in the room being an artist as well.
Yeah. Are you willing to risk losing fans in doing that? Because you, as you grow, some people are naturally also going to say, you know what, I preferred Rahn's old stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and it happens, right? You even have certain fans reach out. They're like, what happened to you making this kind of song? Or ever since you did this, XYZ. And obviously that's not ideally what you want, but I think I used to be more uncomfortable with the idea of an old fan like feeling like I sold out or changed or did something different, right? Just like, oh no, they can't think that I'm different or I'm too XYZ. But I also think that the way we change, no matter how I change, someone's going to be attracted to that change and somebody's going to be turned off by it. And I think that I'm just much more comfortable with that relationship as an artist. I'm going to change and I got to just go the direction that things feel like they're calling me. And if that doesn't resonate with a fan that was a diehard for years, that's not ideal. But at the same time, they're growing in whatever direction they're growing to. And you just kind of got to keep it moving.
Yeah. I agree with you. I genuinely agree. And I genuinely also think your obligation is for you to develop as an artist and get better. And if you force yourself to stay in a lane, you very rarely do get better. You master that very specific lane and you don't get out of it. But I think you don't develop true artistry. Like I look at all the best artists, they have been pushing the boundaries of what they can do as much as possible so that they can actually go, hey, I haven't done this before. I wonder if I can.
Yeah. And I think that approach in general, right? I'm thinking just as a music fan right now, sometimes the first listen through when an artist really changes their sound, you almost don't like it by default. You're like, wait, what is this? I don't recognize this. It's not giving me the same comfort the old sound was, right? But then you listen to it three, four, five times. And for me, the more I listen to something that feels like they really sent themselves somewhere else, the more I just respect it. And the more I'm like, hey, maybe at one point in their life, they were going through this dramatic thing that really changed their sound. And now they're out of that headspace and they want to make something different. And I think that I'm more open to that than I used to be. I think I was definitely the kind of fan that was like, oh, they changed up or oh, they this. But now I think I appreciate that spectrum and the artist journey and them changing a lot more than I used to.
Yeah, that happened to me with Kendrick Lamar's most recent album.
Definitely.
I would just remember hearing it and going, what is this? And just me and my friend, we were in a car, we were just driving and we listened to the whole album back to front and we were just like, I feel pretty disappointed. Like I feel dissatisfied. And then I kept
Right.
listening to it and I was like, oh no, I needed to listen to this multiple times because it is a great album. Like you need to listen to it all. You need to like let it sink in, and then you see the things you missed at the beginning.
Yeah, and I think that album specifically, right? There's so much to soak in. There's so many lessons, concepts, huge life topics being discussed in very articulate ways, big stories to follow, and each song kind of has its own moral. And those kind of songs, I mean, it's like trying to read an encyclopedia in one day. I mean, it really is a lot to soak in. But I think people like Kendrick who make these big concepts album, the concept albums, if you can take the time to listen, soak them in, like you're saying, 3, 4, 5, 6, half a dozen listens, you're leaving feeling really connected with the material instead of almost like overwhelmed, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think you can go one of two ways. You either double down on your opinion that you don't like it, or you kind of go into the opposite direction of going, oh, now I appreciate it. So it's one of two. I feel like it happens because you start to be like, I didn't like that then, and I still don't like it. And I've listened to it 6 times, but these other tracks, oh, I'm a big fan of this.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's difficult. You're never going to win on an album. There's always at least one song that people like, or someone's going to be like, not my favorite.
Right. And I think Kendrick's someone also too, speaking of that spectrum of an artist, he's got bangers, he's got stuff that if you're listening surface level is just a hit, but then if you listen dive into the lyrics, it's very deep. And then he's got songs that are so focused on lyricism that there's really not even a beat at all, right? So, part of it is as a listener, what are you going in thinking you want? Do I want a Kendrick banger? Do I want to be like challenged and like listen to something that makes me more insightful? And I think that a lot of it is just the headspace that we're in. And that's why it's almost important as an artist to develop a catalog where you've got some sad songs, you've got some happy songs, you've got some bangers, you've got some slower ballads. And for me, it's always been a priority to try to feed people a variety of things because we're in a variety of moods as we go through our weeks and through our lives. We need different emotions to be channeled in songs. And so I think, Kendrick is actually a great example of somebody who really can hit a huge spectrum of like radio banger or make something super introspective that kind of makes you think.
Well, it does require you to be quite vulnerable. So like it's quite risky you putting yourself out there like that. It's quite scary. Like people don't like doing it with people they know in terms of telling them the home truths of like, hey man, I'm not feeling great today. But you're putting it out there and you're putting it out to the world. So how do you get past that as well? Like in terms of being able to be like, yeah, I feel sad and I'm going to tell you how sad I feel and I'm going to tell you why I feel sad. And that's like a very vulnerable place to be in because you don't know how that will be received.
Yeah, it definitely is. Honestly, I think just being an artist as long as I have and having a lot of creative friends, there are lots of moments I forget about how vulnerable we're all being in this process, candidly, just because my producer friends, my engineers, my other artist friends are being just as vulnerable with me. So I'm in a circle where it doesn't feel quite so difficult. But then when you put it in these terms, I'm like, wow, you're right. I've put a lot of my personal experiences completely into a song, and then you hope people enjoy that. And it's a lot. But I think for me, one of the things that drew me to like really wanting to identify as an artist and a musician was that there were things I was going through personally that I felt like I couldn't talk to my friends about that I'd write a whole song about in 30 minutes. And then I would write these songs, record them, and keep them. I listened to them by myself. I wouldn't even tell people I had them. And I think so many of my sad songs really came from an extremely therapeutic place where I actually could speak on how I was feeling better through a song than in my own life. And a lot of these songs did take me months to build up the courage to release. Like one of my biggest songs is called What's Going On. Truly one of my first hits when I was really kind of coming up. And I wrote it about the biggest breakup that I had had. And it took me about 8 months to work up the courage to put it out. And my entire close friend group had the song memorized by the time I was brave enough to be like, you know what, I'm putting this out there. Like they like it so much that I have to do this. Like that, and having that core friend group support encouraged me to even be vulnerable enough to put it out in the first place. And I think then once you see the response and you have a few fans DM you and be like, this song really like changed something for me. Like I just went through a breakup too, or my grandma just passed, or this, and people say that the song like truly made that experience better for them. And it's I think from there my momentum built on the willingness to just be vulnerable in the songs.
How do you feel when people say that to you?
I think it's kind of shocking at first, and even in this moment, I'm like, I don't really know, but it helps me because I mean, the reason I became an artist is because I'm just such a fucking huge fan of music, and I think that for a second I go, okay, think about a song that comforted me during a loss. I gave that feeling to someone else, and I think that then I think, holy shit, at one point I was like, I'm never putting this out. I'm too scared. I really don't want to put this out. Like it's too personal. But then look at what it did. And so I think again, like once you see that and you feel it, those moments you don't feel like being vulnerable, you remember that there's a huge potential impact there that's way bigger than yourself. And I think that that's a huge part of what most artists are seeking.
Yeah. And not only to the people that DM you, but you could have influenced the next artist to be vulnerable and put themselves out there.
Which is totally crazy and amazing to think that, like, you're right. Maybe some huge artist that is now out in the world at one point, what I said just was enough encouragement to help get that ball rolling or whatever, And I certainly, what a dope thought that is. Seriously.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I like what, because I'm also like, what is it about being vulnerable in conversations that we feel uncomfortable? Because like you putting it in a song is like I don't know, is it different because it's in music? Is it different because it has a ballad and melody? And is it like an ability to make it almost slightly less real, or that's how you go through it? Because you have to rectify and approach all the emotions genuinely on your own. And then by the time you do release it, you probably are somewhat healed. And I'm trying to like grapple the difference between the music release and not being able to talk to people as well about it.
Right. I mean, I think part of it too is at first when we're having huge emotions in any direction, it's just hard to sort out, hard to articulate. And I think that that's part of being vulnerable is we're also don't necessarily feel like we know how to describe it. So you're being vulnerable in the first place. Then you necessarily are like, oh, and I'm going to fuck up how I'm going to say this. They're not going to understand. They're not going to get it. And so I think for me, then the music became a place to kind of like experiment with how I wanted to heal from this and grow and approach. And then I think like hearing myself, maybe the song is about regaining my confidence or my strength back, or maybe the song is about the way I was hurt. When I listen to it, it makes it real instead of this hypothetical huge thought that's floating around my head. The song kind of gives it something that's a little more rooted in reality. But like you're saying, maybe it's less raw because there's like a jingle around it or like a song to it instead of just saying to your friend, hey, I'm feeling like, feeling like shit, or I'm having anxiety, or I'm having whatever, because it is harder to just kind of point blank say that, in my opinion, than it is to maybe like write a song about it.
Maybe, but maybe that is part of it. But then as you were talking, I was like, oh, maybe it's because there is a beginning and an end. Like maybe there's something
Wow.
to it of
Yeah.
like, I felt it and now it's over. Like it's finished now. And maybe there's something about like there is something in the concept of there's a beginning and an end to the feeling, or there's a beginning and end to that journey, and I've accepted it, and now I'm moving on with the rest of my life.
I think you're spot on with that because even think about it in a different emotion in songs, right? If you're really angry and someone really pissed you off, like I'll put on a hard song, something super like loud, kind of whatever, more on that end. A couple of songs like that, and I feel better. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's definitely there's something to that like it gives it a space to express all those things. And then like you're saying, and then the space kind of comes to a close when the song comes to a close, or when the playlist or the album comes to a close, you can kind of be like, oh, okay, I felt those things. Now I'm going to move forward. And so I think you're totally right about that.
Do you often feel angry? You don't strike me as like an angry guy. You strike me as like quite a like a happy-go-lucky type of person.
I thank you. First of all, I feel like a younger me, you might not have thought that so much. And I'll have friends who will tune into this podcast and be like, I've seen this man more mad than anybody on the earth. But I think that I'm a very I think I'm a super expressive person, and that at a certain point, like I used to get really fixated on things and would get incredibly angry when I felt like I had lost control, or I had a plan and the plan went awry, even though I thought about everything and whatever. And I think that I've loosened up my grip on control and life quite a bit, and it's zen me out. There's no doubt.
Yeah. I mean, it's a weird industry to have to want all the control you can. Because most of it is, funnily enough, out of your control. Once it's out in the ether, it's out in the ether. It's like, good luck.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think that just doing this, being in this space as I have, as many years as I have, I have had songs with the perfect campaigns lined up, right? That like totally went wrong and that I invested thousands of dollars in that, like, in my opinion, when you really look at an ROI, it flopped. But then you have songs that you're like, oh, this is just a little freestyle. Let me just put this out. People will like it. It's something until my next song. And then that becomes the biggest song of the year. And so I think that things truly are so random in some ways that the longer you're in that space, the more comfortable you just kind of become with that. And I think that it's really translated after many years of feeling really frustrated, candidly. I think it's translated into my life and it's bigger than just music now. And I'm like, we plan for stuff, but you know what? When it goes awry, it goes awry. We've always figured it out anyways, you know?
Yeah, because I mean, you've been in the industry you've been like full time or like releasing music since about 2015. So you're coming up to like a decade of.
Yeah, and kind of had a yep, and I would say that 2014 was kind of the defining year of I had been making music for a little while, but was going under a different acronym and felt like I hadn't fully found my sound yet. And so end of 2014 into 2015 was when Rahn Harper kind of really emerged with this modern name, sound, feel. And I mean, since then, yeah, it's really been the center of my life since.
Yeah, so I mean, you're coming up literally your 10 years in the game is coming up at the back end of 2024, at the beginning of 2025. That's pretty incredible to be able to say that you've been dropping music publicly for a decade.
Yeah, it's really crazy to think about how long it's been. I'm like officially around the corner from Unk status right now. That's that's cracking me up. But it's an amazing journey, and there's certainly, even before putting out songs on all platforms and being a little more confident with putting myself out there, there were many years that went in before that too. And then even in high school, before writing my own music, being in choir, participating in some of the musical theater performances that we did. At one point, I was in a church choir, and then that woman, her name was Fedora Harris, and she ended up becoming a voice coach of mine. And she was a game changer for me, really helped me find my sound even before I knew I wanted to write music. And so, you realize when you're older and you have enough time to look back, like you're saying, on these 10 years, there were even 10 years before that kind of subtly influenced where I've ended up now. So it really has been a lifelong journey in a lot of ways.
A lot of people have told me that being in church and singing in a church choir has profoundly impacted their ability to perform and then has directly linked their ability to become musicians. Like, I feel like there is something about that place that really forces you and teaches you true art, like the power of the voice. Like, the more people I speak to, the more commonality I see in that thread of like, it's way more common than you would think. And it's so many artists who started in a choir, just so many that's where they started. That's where they got the chops. And then they developed from there. Like it is wild that it can be as simple as that in terms of the beginning of the arc or the story.
Totally. And I think a lot of it just has to do with early exposure, but I also think religion really ties in the power of music so much. I think I don't necessarily identify as super religious or Christian or anything. I grew up in a super Christian household. And as much as I very much believe in like faith and spirituality now, the music part is really what stuck with me as the thing that was kind of uplifting. And again, the thing that drew me as a kid, that eventually led to writing its own songs. And like you're saying, I mean, even the generation before us, from Madonna to Michael Jackson to Britney Spears to Justin Timberlake, I mean, like any of these people immediately speak up about how big church was in their lives. And it does seem to be a huge thread for a lot of artists that just seem to embody making music and having a long career.
Yeah. And I can't figure out why. Like, I understand why, but I can't figure it out, if that makes sense. Like, I see the thread and it makes sense that you start music, but why is it that particular thread? Like, I don't know, there is something perhaps that takes away from and tries and teach you the challenges of like being able to hit different notes and different pitches. And maybe it really is like putting you through the school of being a musician.
Yeah, and I think it probably feels less like school would. If I think we'd all learn less from being in an official choir school than from just being exposed to like a church choir, because it's a place you can learn and make some mistakes in kind of a judgment-free zone. But also it's a place where you see people week after week get up there in front of others, do something, and you see the reaction. It makes everybody in the church happy. It brings everybody together. So I think maybe part of it is just being exposed to like the impact and the power and seeing like, oh, if I get up there week after week, look at the way people respond to this. And then it just makes them want to do that in their own life.
And I guess to that end, there's no goal in the sense of like, no one's doing the church choir to become a famous musician. Like that's
No.
not that they're not linked at all. So maybe it's the freedom, like you said, that there's no expectation, there's no grades, there's just like you just get better and over time you enjoy it more. And then you're like, actually, I wonder if I could do this like full time as opposed to just do it for fun.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, but the church thread is interesting because you're right. There's clearly like there's something in the sauce when you started young in the church environment specifically. Because you hear that all the time from huge artists.
Yeah. I'm yet to figure it out, but it is interesting because you are right. All religions seem to have a musical thread. There is a musical aspect to the way religion seems to work. And so it's unsurprising that music kind of just plays such an important part in our lives. I think I've said this before. I don't particularly understand how music impacts us the way it does because it really does. It like gets into
Yeah.
your core, it gets inside you. Even in movies, like you're watching a scary movie and it's like the scary music that makes you feel the sense of dread. It's not necessarily just the movie itself. So I don't know. There is something
Yeah,
about
and
music
as a
that's
musician, yeah, no, and as a musician, I would argue that the song is 90% of it and that the movie clip or the moment is actually only 10. The soundscape of our lives is so impacted by music. Every restaurant that's popular and successful has music, and it's a great playlist that's playing in the background. Every movie needs the musical soundtrack. Every show, every valued aspect of entertainment has music just fully immersed in it. I mean, even art exhibits like can have so much more impact with like the music. And I think it's really what draws me to it as my favorite medium. I'm not really a movie buff. I'm not really somebody who is incredibly dedicated to any other mediums, but music has always been the thing that I just cannot stop listening and can't put down.
yeah. Well, because you do make very varied music, so it's not like you sit in the lane of hip hop or R&B and pop. You kind of move and shake with like different sounds as they go. So you must listen to quite a lot of like different music to be able to be like, oh, this is cool, this is interesting, and this is what these people are doing, and like just to constantly be able to like just shift and move throughout the different genres.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I was just being thrown a lot of different sounds and a lot of different music at a lot of different angles. I grew up as an only child, so I was really exposed to a lot of what my parents and my older cousins were listening to. And a lot of my cousins that lived close to me were a little bit older than me. So I'm 6, 7 years old, and they're watching TRL live and showing me their favorite MTV music videos, and they're burning me like the first Now CDs and stuff like that. I remember I was either in fourth or fifth grade when one of them got me the 50 Cent Get Rich or Die Trying and like Ludacris's Chicken and Beer. And my parents like found my CDs and yelled at my cousin for giving me those like too young. So on one side, my dad listened to a lot of old rock and old soul from Eric Clapton to Steely Dan to James Brown and Freddie King and BB King and a lot of big blues artists and old soul things like that. But my mom listened to a lot of 80s music like Eurythmics, Talking Heads, Michael Jackson, the Commodores. But then because I was kind of surrounded by my older cousins, I was always asking them to put me on to the music and whatever they had. And I was like, I would sneak watch MTV when I was a little kid because I wanted to know what the cool new thing was. And I think, a lot of us that are my age feel like we were just radio generation. Like we grew up on the hits of all genres. And I feel like that's why a lot of us have very fluid genres now as artists and will like as listeners. I think more people than not actually listen to almost everything, just depending on the setting, right? Maybe I'm wrong in that, but I think a lot of people our age have a huge spectrum of what they listen to.
I think you're right. I think you're right that most people are like, I like all different types of music. I historically have only been a hip hop lane type person where that is all I listen to.
Yeah.
As I've gotten older, I've gotten more open to listening to different types of music. And I've realized how silly I was for being very closed minded with regards to other genres. But most people I talk to, they're definitely like, yeah, I just listen to whatever I like. Like it doesn't, I
Yeah,
don't go for a
exactly.
genre. I just wait and I'm like, I like that song and I'm going to listen to that song.
And it comes up a lot just because I'm a musician. I'll be like, what genres do people listen to? What this? And like most people truly say a little bit of everything. So I think that I think I've always listened to a lot of stuff. I will say that for me at first, just like I was telling you, okay, maybe I'm writing kind of a darker EP that's about being lonely and some dark feelings. So now sometimes I ironically have to write a brighter song to kind of get to the deeper, darker song later. So right now I'm not in that mood. I got to do this first. I think that for me, writing styles became another thing I wanted to do different, where it was like, okay, yeah, maybe I make mostly hip hop music. And at a certain point, I think my music was much more just kind of a pop rap R&B combination hybrid. Um, but now I'm expanded more and more. At first, I was kind of helping write for other people and was like, well, if this acoustic artist wants to work with me and I can help write songs with them, then I'll go more acoustic. Then I'll go more songwriter. But I think that as I did that more and more, I just wanted to put it out myself. I didn't want to necessarily limit it to, well, I make this kind of music, so I should only release this kind of music. And I think as other artists have gotten more brave and done things that feel more and more out of the box, that I felt more comfortable with that too. And candidly, I think I've written a lot of really great songs in genres that at one point I didn't see as mine that I tried to sell as a songwriter. And the songwriting professional world is really hard. And there's a lot of hoops to jump through. So eventually I was like, I don't want these songs to collect dust anymore. I don't want these songs to go to waste. And so I think a couple of years ago, probably 2 or 3 years ago, I really started saying, you know what? Don't care about the genre. If it feels good, it feels good. And I'm going to put it out.
Why is it so difficult in the songwriting world? You would think that it wouldn't be as difficult.
I, you know, there's so many components that go into it, but I think for songwriters, there's so many dedicated hours of putting in so much work, and there's very little chance the song ends up coming out and that they get paid a fair contract. There's so many things. Like if step one is writing a hit as a songwriter by yourself at home, you wrote the best song ever. And step 10 is you're getting paid off that song for the rest of your life and you're a successful songwriter. Navigating those steps is as difficult as it comes in the music industry because maybe there were 8 other songwriters in the room and now you're all splitting. Even if it's a huge record, you're splitting such minuscule amounts that you have to do that 100 times in order to really make a living. Or sometimes if you aren't super established, you'll get bullied out of things. Well, I know that you want 10% of the revenue, but this is a Sway Lee song and you don't really have any big credits. So you're kind of lucky to be here. So we're going to give you 2% and you're going to sign a non-disclosure that says you didn't write this. But if you're looking for your big break, do you say no? And I think these are where songwriters, producers have to ask themselves like what they're willing to do and what their morals are. And this is where art and being a creative gets devalued because another kid is going to go, I want this opportunity so bad that if you say no because the contract's terrible, another person is waiting in the wings and they'll do it for free. And candidly, I understand both sides of the coin.
Yeah. What would you do?
I think it depends on who the artist is, but if they're big enough, for me, I would rather have the song be in the world than put my foot down and get a lawyer so that it can't be released. If I love this song, I would rather lose money and just fucking watch it take off and watch it have the impact.
Yeah. It's interesting because part of me is the other side where it's like, no, you don't get to profit on me for free.
Right. But, you know, and then I'm like, and then you decide, okay, well, if that's really how I feel, then I'll shoot my shot and I'll put this out. And if the song would have been bigger because, you know, Post Malone wrote it or because XYZ, okay, maybe it would have been bigger if they did it. But you know what? I keep my integrity this way and I keep the fact that I created something really special. And even if I get less views, maybe that's better. And I think that that's where, if you're a hybrid artist and songwriter, that there's just a lot to sort through, and there's just a lot of hoops to jump through. That's where the industry can really be draining. I think after a while, these people are actually really ready to write the best song ever. It's navigating all of these background pieces that is the most discouraging part.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you, if someone gave me an NDA, I would never sign that fucking thing. No way.
What about an NDA with $500,000?
Then I might.
Because and maybe this happens. Let me give you an example, right? Like Boy Wonder and a big producer make a song, but the sample is from someone that's much smaller. Like they bought a little sample pack. Sometimes they're like, we know the song is in Future and Metro Boomin and 21 Savage are on the song. They know the song is going to go platinum in the next couple of years, right? If someone is smaller is involved, maybe they'll pay them a chunk of money up front. No percentages like, hey, here's $200,000, here's $100,000 for doing what you did. Thank you so much. You're going to sign this thing, and we're going to say we're the only people that produced it.
Yeah, say even still, I'm not sure I would be able to agree to something like that.
And I totally get it. Yeah.
It is me. And without me, there is no song. And so I would be like, hey, I don't want the change up front. I want equity. It's all to me. And this is the annoying part is like the music industry is all business. And it's all like, how hard are you willing to negotiate? And are you willing to lose things in order to win things? And it sucks because people who are in the industry typically are in there because of the very things you were talking about with me today, which is I felt these things. I wanted to get my emotions out. I wanted to create. I want people to feel like they can connect with someone and something and outside of just their world. And that's typically why you get in. And now you and I are talking about NDAs. We're talking about percentages. We're talking about not getting recognized for the music that you make. And it's like, God damn, it's depressing as shit because it's like that sucks. And then it's like, no wonder people will stay independent because you don't have that problem.
Right. I think everything you said is so spot on. And two things to piggyback is one, there's the biggest advantage of being independent, right? Nobody's telling you what you got to do in these things. If you have a good producer and a good engineer and good friends you're making stuff with, you sign the contracts with them, you give them their percentage, everybody's happy, right? But gaining traction and sticking out these days with little to no budget or eating your own savings account to try to risk it and to get there with how random everything is and with a little bit of, you know, because some of these things, even again, with a great campaign, you need a stroke of luck. You need a stroke of word of mouth. You need a stroke of virality. You need something to really like piggyback it into that place where it really gets that exposure you're hoping for. So it's a balancing act. And at the end of the day, like you said, okay, I'm not signing the NDA. You guys can put the song out somehow without me. Unfortunately, they will put the song out without you and they will redo your sample and it will sound this close, but it's not the same. Their lawyer's better. Now, instead of taking the NDA and 100K, you just got bullied out of the song and now you have nothing. And like you're saying, creating to me is so pure. Like artists want to express something and share it with the world. But when you get into this business side with NDAs and contracts and out lawyering each other and waiting months, hoping to kind of like out consequence this other person, those aspects can be really grueling and really depressing. And I think that there's a lot of phenomenal talents that eventually just don't want to put up with that anymore. And so they either do something that's a little bit more independent and a little adjacent, or they just kind of give up.
Well, I think that a lot of artists would just give up because it's sad. You're like, I put my whole life into this. Like I put my life story, I put my emotion, I went through all this heartache and I put this out there and now someone's coming along and fucking me over. And it's like, hey, I'm a person too. Like I get that
Yeah,
you want to move forward, but I also lived a life and am living a life and I'm trying to do my thing and you're just willing to walk all over me. That's a pretty difficult thing to accept. And then to also be able to be like, well, if I let it happen once, I might be able to let it happen again, but I don't like the feeling of letting it happen. And then if I don't like the feeling, why am I a musician at all? That's
right.
why I became a musician because I liked what I did. And now I feel like I don't.
And I think it really flips the script on the feelings, and that dealing with that emotional roller coaster is also another difficult part that doesn't get talked about a ton until you really dive into it. You know, the easiest example I can give is I'll keep everything anonymous, but had a friend who was an amazing producer who was kind of still coming up at this time. Now he is working with most A-listers. He truly has made it. But at the time was kind of building his catalog as a producer. He got a call from his manager and was like, "We got a huge placement for a French Montana song, crazy big song. Like he had been working on it forever. They're like, they're going to put it out." He gets this call in the middle of a writing session. It's like, "I got to step out," comes back in the room and is like, "Guys, like I don't want to whatever, but like there's this huge French Montana song I've been working on. It's going to come out. I can't believe this. This is like his biggest placement to date." So we kind of stop the studio session for a second. We pour up a drink. We're like, "Bro, cheers. Like you deserve this, man." And he does. Such a hard worker. 30 minutes later, his manager calls him again and is like, "Hey, they're being a little weird about the negotiations. Here's the percentage I gave them. They're just being a little this, whatever. I'm gonna work on." Okay, sounds good. Vibe changes a little bit in the room, right?
Yeah.
30 minutes later, they're calling again and they're like, "Dude, they're talking about giving us like half a percentage point, and I was asking for 10 times what they were." And the other producer, and then Jonathan's on the phone, or he's talking on the phone. He's like, "They didn't do anything. They didn't do any. What do you mean? This guy did this." And now there's a third person who said they were in the room who also wants credit and all these things. And now he's talking to, this guy's talking to his manager back and forth over and over and over again. And this thing that brought him so much joy an hour ago, 2 hours ago, is now like the reason he can barely even keep working on the song, because this like dream turned into this like negotiation nightmare in a matter of hours. And I think that was my first taste of really watching that go down and being like, "Oh, this is not for the frail of heart. This negotiation stuff, this is serious. And if they know they're bigger than you, now they're really going to play bully ball sometimes."
Yeah. Yeah. And it is all leverage of power. And it's who has the most power in the room. And the person who has the most power in the room is the person who calls the shots. And sometimes you have to play bigger than you are. And sometimes you have to really like try and put on a front, like so that you can gain some leverage back. Because my career is corporate. So in
Right.
sales, and I negotiate on a regular basis. And that is genuinely what you have to do is you have to put on a front to be like, this means nothing to me. So you can negotiate, but this is my stance and I'll walk away if I have to. And like, it's difficult because you do care and you do have investment
Right.
in it. And it's really tough because at the end of the day, if you lose it, you're like, fuck, that sucks. I put so much into it. I'm so annoyed. I'm sad. But like, I at least deal with things that I didn't make. I'm just selling certain things, but you're
Right.
selling your music, you're selling your art. It's so tied to who you are as an individual and tied to your soul that it's not so easy to be able to be as objective as that.
Definitely. And I think that's where having a good team or a good manager, or even just a good lawyer or a good friend who can help you sort through these things, right? Somebody who has a little bit of an inside scoop as to how the industry works, because I think artists overall, we're big softies. We're all very emotional people. And I think that put in these very rigid contractual conversations, it took me a long time to realize, oh, you're like you're saying, you have to speak different. You have to present yourself in a very different way. And I think that even if you're the smaller artist and end up getting on a big song, even that, even if you were the smallest leverage at the time, you said yes because of the leverage you're about to get. So the entire thing is rooted in leverage. Okay, I hated the deal I signed, right, for the song, but now I just put out a song with Drake. Now I can say I produced a Kendrick record. Now I can say I produced SZA's most recent song. So I think a lot of times artists, producers, writers will take an to terrible deal in the right circumstance just because of the sheer leverage that that opportunity will give them afterwards. And so I think all of those things kind of have to come into play when you're doing this as a professional and you're doing this as a career.
Yeah. Well, I think all those things are so important to recognize. And I'm glad you pointed them out, because it is like the long game. It's the long game of your career, because otherwise you do end up just digging your heels in on one song and you're like, okay, well, now I know I'm never going to go to them again. That's the other risk
Right.
that you take. You dig your heels in because you kind of want repeat business. That's what the other thing is. You kind of want them to come back and be like, you know what? Rahn's a good guy. He didn't make things too difficult. Okay, we fucked him over a bit with a shit deal. Maybe next time we'll look after him a little bit.
Maybe next time we don't. Exactly.
Yeah.
And I do agree that there's a relationship building there. Maybe you do get screwed over at first, but like you're saying, maybe the artist really enjoys working with me as a songwriter, and they're like, well, as we build, your deals will get better and better. So there's things that are kind of worth sticking out. But I really do think that it's the best part of being an independent artist for me, and just gives you as an independent artist, it gives you that freedom and not feeling so tied into other people's opinions, other people trying to out leverage you, truly, as we've been talking about this whole time.
It's so disappointing that on a music podcast we talk about leverage.
Yeah, it really shows you just how different the headspaces are of like creation of music, and then when it's again in the kind of commercialized setting, how things are done and distributed. But um as I've gotten older, I think I've found a much better balance in just enjoying writing the songs. That's why I did it in the first place, right?
Yeah, because I was reading you had a deal, like a distribution deal, with Interscope, I think, from memory, and
I did, yep.
Yeah, for about 12 months, and then you went back to doing independent. How was that in terms of like, going from one to the other and then back to fully independent?
Yeah, it definitely was an amazing learning experience, and I would never say that I regret it, because it's made me infinitely smarter on the industry side, and also just genuinely helped me understand what I want out of this career, right? But the Interscope world is just very different and I imagine it's like this for a lot of labels. I made a lot of songs, and that's when I really kind of stepped into this songwriter role as well. Interscope definitely taught you to diversify your skills. If you're an artist, you're also going to be a songwriter or a producer or an engineer, and try to diversify your abilities. And I was thankful for them pushing me in that way. But I made so much music with so many people, and then like could struggled to get them to let me release anything. And as you've seen, I like to release songs, and I like the momentum of that. And for me, once I really get the momentum of releasing, it helps me continue to keep that pace. And when I was with Interscope, they would put me in the room with a new producer constantly, sometimes 7 sessions in 1 week. Wow. Sometimes 2 sessions in one day, completely different location, completely different people. But then when it came time to release, there was a ton of hesitancy until everybody agreed on things. And now I have to get approval from a board, approval from my A&R. And for me as an artist, jumping through all of those hoops, waiting for permission, those kind of things really dampened my spirit. And towards the end of the deal, I was not making any music at all, because I was like, what is the point? They're going to listen, tell me they like it, and then a month later, when I beg them to release it, they're going to give me some reason why I can't.
I didn't realize you had to get board approval to release your music. Like that.
So part of and it depends on how literal it is. My deal was a 50-50, and we both co-owned masters, but that also means anything that they don't agree on, it doesn't happen. Because our deal was that we always had to agree on things moving forward, the artwork, the songs, those type of things. And so if I couldn't get a yes from all three of the people I needed a yes from, I was kind of out of luck. So in my opinion, even though it was a co-split, quote unquote, I still did not have power if they didn't want to move forward with me.
Yeah. Well, and then it goes back to the leverage. If you're the only yes in the room and they're always saying no, then they control all the power because they know, well, Rahn is always going to want to drop. So now we just get to choose which ones of his that we get to pick and choose from, and we get to decide. And yeah, that it, I see I understand because they're a business, and I understand that they're also choosing a scheduling and they want to make money and all these things. But you also don't make money from songs just sitting there gathering dust.
I think what you just said is the number one thing I just don't understand about the kind of macro label structure. You'd rather negotiate a contract, and if somebody doesn't pay you the exact amount you want, you say no, and the song dies right then and there. And I just think, wouldn't you rather shoot 100 shots and just see what sticks and then market towards the songs people are gravitated towards than be like, okay, we're only going to put out these 10 and they're all going to explode. Why don't we just put it out into the universe and let the people decide what's great, and then you can market around that? But they want to roll it out as though they knew it was the best song of all time from the beginning.
Yeah. Part of me is, I wonder if how they report their earnings. You know what I mean? Like, how do they, they must have investors as well in terms of who is putting money into the business, who's looking at ROIs, who's looking at, okay, you signed X amount of people, and like, did we get the return, or like, I don't know. It must depend also on like just certain things they can do in the business world that they could say, well, we didn't release as many songs from this person, so we can write it off. And like, this would, I don't know. There has to be something on that end because other than that, I agree with you. It doesn't make sense not to release the music. It's already been made.
Yes, that part of the work's been done, right? So why not release it? And those are just differences in ideologies. And I think that for me, that's why being an independent artist is just my best choice. If at some point things grow enough, ironically, coming back to leverage again, if things grow enough and I had enough leverage to walk into a label deal and I'm the person dictating what the contract looks like, I would be super open to it. But again, like that's something you build. Somebody who's kind of classically done this was Russ. He built his career really independently. Then the first deal he signed was a one album deal. What does he have to lose there? If the album goes great, he signs another one. If it doesn't, he goes right back to what was already working. And I think that generally, if I had advice for people, it's just stop looking for a deal, build leverage, build everything, build your catalog, build your following, build your streams, build your live show performance, build around things. Because if you are able to walk into a room and they know what you're doing is successful, now you're going to get a deal that actually changes your life for the better. Until then, they're going to be the person who says, well, technically, we're the one kind of offering you something here. And your deal will reflect that.
Yeah. And then you want multiple people wanting to get your services. Like you want to be able to walk into multiple rooms and go, well, I have 4 offers on the table. So someone
Right.
give me something I like, because right now I don't see shit I like on this deal. So I have a deal with this label over here who's going to give me everything I want. So up to you. And that's, again, that's the walk away ability. That is the, I'm willing to walk because I have another offer on the table that's better than this one. So either you do better or see you later. And I'm going to go take that other deal. So there's all that pushing, but I mean, everyone has gone through those pains. I think because Kendrick had a label deal. I think he had to do 5 albums, and I think his most recent album was like the last one under his label. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm not getting that correct, but I think
No, I
there were
think you're
label
right. I think it
deals.
was a 4 or 5 album deal. And I think it ended up taking him like 8 years. And, there's a lot of people who still have really successful careers being very locked in to their label, where the label owns the majority of the income, the majority of the decisions. They sign a 5 or 10 album deal. Sometimes deals are a matter of years, and people will sign 20 or 30-year deals. And then after 20 or 30 years, they can renegotiate to own the rights to the masters. At the end of the day, all of it is a risk, right? But I think that in this modern era where you're able to really put yourself out there with all of the social media platforms, with all of the abilities to learn how to market yourself that are truly free and available to you online. Of course, the studio time, the marketing, investing in yourself isn't free, but there's a lot of these skills that you can learn online now. And I think even 10 or 20 years ago, you didn't know where to go to try to even start to navigate the music industry. Or if you had some traction, you didn't know what to do to continue to gain your leverage by yourself. I think at a certain point, we needed those pieces of the industry to be in place a lot more than we potentially do now.
Well, it's like before you didn't have the internet. So how do you get plays? Club
Right.
play, play, and radio personalities and radio play only happens when you have a relationship with someone in radio. And who has those relationships? The labels. The labels have the
Right.
money to go and say, hey, I'm going to spend 200K and I'm going to put your song on the radio and it's going to become a hit because I can guarantee it's going to get played 1,000 times and become an earworm, and no one's going to forget it, even if it's not the best track I've ever heard. Like, it'll still like catch fire. But that is definitely not the case now. You can put songs out independently and still like be top in the charts and still build a fan base and have shows and do it all. And it's exhausting and it's difficult, but you can still do it and you can make a genuine career. Because I genuinely think like the equation is, imagine taking 100% of the profits. Like,
Right.
imagine getting everything. So you don't need 10 million fans. You just need 100,000. Like,
Yeah, 100%. And I couldn't agree more. 10,000 really dedicated fans and 10,000 monthly listeners that are active is so much more important than 100,000 Instagram followers, 100,000 monthly listeners, but nobody's buying your t-shirt. You can't fill your hometown in a small venue. I mean, those things can be exposed so quickly now. And a lot of those kind of, Instagram followers, even streams these days, if you know where to go, they can be bought. T-Pain talks about this kind of stuff on his podcast a lot. And he's like, Grammys can be bought. And if you can buy a Grammy secretly under the table, everything smaller than that can also be purchased. And I think that, people just got to decide that they're going to go with the authentic thing. And even if it's less people, if they're truly engaged, you're so much better off. And I think that even a few years ago, people would say chase fame generally a lot more than now. They're like, well, no, find your niche, find what you're bringing to the table, find what that audience is interested in, and cater everything that you're doing towards that. And candidly, it makes so much more sense.
well, I think that the math speaks for itself. If you have 10,000 fans who are loyal to you and they each, just one of them buys something worth $20, whether it's a CD, merch, whatever it might be of yours, that's 200 grand. Like,
Right.
that's a hell of a lot of money, and that is all yours that you don't cut. And then the next year, that's 200 grand this year. You can probably be making 200, 250, 300 year on year, and now you're an artist full time. Like, that is good money. Whereas, like, okay, you might have 1 million followers or you might have 1 million streams, but the songs that you release, you don't get the full cut. The shows you go to, you don't get the full cut. The merch, you don't get the
Right.
full cut. And so you're famous, but you don't have shit to show for it. Like, you don't have a sustained career. You're hot and then you're not. And you don't have people who are like, I will buy all your stuff. So yeah. And then if the 10,000 turns into 100,000, you end up at 2 million all of a sudden. And you're self-sustained. There's no one else that gets to take that away from you.
Right. And so at that point, too, would you even necessarily want to sign something? Because now you figured out a way to sustain a $2 million profit as an artist per year. Meanwhile, you're cranking out music this whole time. And so you also, even if it's minimal, still have streaming revenue that you're bringing in too. I mean, like you're saying, it's a lot of initial upfront cost, both time, effort, and money. But once you can get that ball rolling, I mean, look at someone that you even interviewed. Look at like what LaRussell did.
Yeah.
He's like a pioneer on that blueprint of just stick to your fans, have them buy it directly from you, create the relationship around them for them, and get them involved, and they will pay and they will help you live the life that you want to as an artist. And he's been someone that has seen tons of success with that.
Yeah. Well, Russ is another one. His fans are extremely loyal, like
Extremely,
extremely
no
loyal.
doubt.
And you're like, that's because it came from a genuine place. It wasn't shit. It wasn't just like, I want to get as famous as quickly as I can. It was like, I want to build something. I want to build a catalog. I want to do good music. I want to change the way things go. And I think people like that. People don't like big industry shit. Like, I mean, look at all the stuff that's coming out. I hate to be one of those people, but like you look at half the music, it all sounds the same. There's no heart, there's no soul. It's all just like, all right, I've heard this song 1,000 times. There's nothing special about it. And then you hear an album from an independent artist, you hear a song from an independent artist, and you're like, wow, this is so cool. It's so interesting. The sound is different, the lyrics are different, the pacing is different. And you're like, this is what music is all about. That's actually what it is.
Yeah, I think you can certainly tell when people's intention was to make a hit record, right? And it ends up being really negative in the result of the song. We're going to write a hit. We're going to imitate this because that worked last time. And especially once we hit the pandemic and people were really stuck inside and they were on their phones and advertising on our phones became at an all-time high. Now I think we're just so sick of it. We've been manufactured and sold and kind of given these overproduced, overzealous commercials, overproduced songs, overly chaotic things to try to get our attention and keep us watching and all of these things. And I think it's part of why country and acoustic and singer-songwriter stuff is really resurging. It's because I think for a moment there we really peaked in like manufactured sound. And people are fucking tired of it. They're tired of it. And I think that even a passive music listener is like, I'm sick of this. It all
Yeah.
sounds the same. It doesn't feel the same. And it's why I think we're seeing kind of a renaissance of something that feels more raw.
Yeah. Well, I think hip hop really struggled and is struggling now with what it stands for. Like, I just see it and everyone's kind of like, I don't really know like what this is. There is this like, I don't know, it feels like it's just attention grabbing. That's what people are fighting for. It's the attention. It's not for any sustained success. Like, you have the odd artist who's trying to make those albums that stand the test of time, but for the most part, it just feels like, oh, you're just releasing attention grabbing shit. And that's why country is coming back. That's why acoustic is coming back, because hip hop was the biggest and probably still is the biggest genre in the world, but it's getting caught up to. Like, other genres are coming back.
Yeah, and I agree. I think it's just because there's too many people taking the I'm going to be the most obnoxious act in the room approach and then just combining it with hip hop. I think that if your goal is to gain virality quick, hip hop has always like historically been kind of explicit, kind of raw, kind of gritty. So someone who's looking for this like ultimate attention just takes those things to a super extreme to kind of just get attention. And like you're saying, it feels like so much of the like, you know, there's certainly good hip hop also, but there's a lot of up and coming artists. And I'm like, this feels like it was built around the whole thing was built around a viral video. The whole thing was built around an internet personality, not this person actually being like a good rapper.
Well, Sexy Red comes to mind to me. And like, say whatever, if you like Sexy Red. But I just look at it and I'm like, what is this? Like, you're just trying to be as gross as you can. And I'm like, this is like, how does this get so big? And it's just like, oh, I know, because it's attention and it's shocking and it's not. But like, it makes me a little bit sad because I'm like, but what about all the songs where like people are speaking for real from the heart? Like, I don't know. I think we've lost our way a little bit in
I agree.
where we've
Oh,
gone.
I do. Yeah, and I think that it speaks more just about attention spans and what we're valuing a little bit. And this is a perfect example. I commented a really funny, I don't even remember the kid's name, but it was someone I follow on the radar because I enjoy just kind of I've been put on to several good rappers from those freestyles. But I've also seen some of the worst performances of my entire life on the radar Instagram page. And so at one point, somebody was rapping, and I mean, you truly couldn't understand what this kid was saying. It was weird. His friends are jumping around in the background. It was super chaotic. And my comment on there, I was trolling candidly, and I wrote on there, "You guys are just letting anybody on here at this point, huh?" With like a laughing face. And tons of people liked it, but then I had tons of people coming after me in the DMs, like, Ron Harper, your music sucks, and don't even, you shut up. And this kid's wavy, and hitting me with all the Gen Z lingo and stuff. And one of the things that one of the kids responded, and this is exactly our point. One of the kids responded and said, 2.7 million views would say differently, pal. And I said, that's it right there. You're confusing attention and virality with music, with making a song. And I think that there's so many people who have just tried to blur those lines. And the only goal is attention, and music is just a route to get there. And that part of music, I cannot stand. It's driving me crazy. It really is.
Well, it's like the desire is now to be the court jester rather than the king or the queen. Like everyone's trying to be, I have the attention and I can keep the attention of everyone, and I'm the jester. I do the best jokes or whatever. Whereas like that wasn't the case all the time. Like this fallacy of fame being the thing that everyone wants to be aspired to, like the amount of people who are like on TikTok and following trends, and like the one thing that has always pissed me off is people who are crying on TikTok, and like fucking turn that shit off. Like the most manufactured bullshit I've ever seen in my life. No one, or if you do this, then there's something wrong with you. But if you cry and your first instinct is to take out your phone and film yourself and then put it on the internet,
I have to document this, right?
Fuck me dead. That's so stupid. Like I'm like, what is going on? Like, and they're like, oh, whatever, my relationship. And it's just like, just stop it. Stop putting your shit out there. You just want the attention.
Those are really funny and hilarious, and there's a deep irony about posts like that. And the other one that really cracks me up is people will post like, was having this really authentic moment in nature, so I pulled my phone out and I'm going to share it with you, and now it's an Instagram reel. And I'm like, you were having an authentic emotional experience, having a human experience, and again, your first thought was, oh, I better just butcher this moment and pull my phone out and document it, because this could like totally do well on the internet.
Yeah, well, I have to get the tripod out and set up in the right light and get the lighting right. And then I've got to walk, and then like, oh, that walk wasn't that good. I'll change the angle that I'm walking, and then I got to do a voiceover, and it was very authentic, and I feel very healed.
Yeah, and that was so real and so raw. Yeah.
Thank you.
And
Thank you for sharing.
I just think in general, right? Let's say somebody wants to be a clothing designer, or somebody wants to be a musician. Honestly, you name it. Any entrepreneurial field. Now, people are convinced the route is do anything for fame. Then once you have fame and attention, repivot that and leverage it and respin it into the thing that you actually wanted to do. But by that point, like you're saying, you've been the jester so long that when you're like, hey guys, I was doing this as an act, and now I actually have this really organic, authentic thing to share. I hope you're open to it. You built your fame on being the class clown. You built your fame on being someone who was willing to be the biggest idiot online. And now you're going to try to spin this. And candidly, for some people, I have seen it work. But I think that that's become the new approach. And I do think that it's really just watering down music, or who gets attention, or what songs end up trending. Because there certainly are millions of incredibly talented people. And when I go to a live show in my local town, even of someone I've never heard of, and I go 9 times out of 10, I'm like, God, this person is talented. And with the right people around them, oh, it would be over. It'd be over. Everyone would know the song. But there's quite a lot of hoops to jump through, and I think right now there's quite a lot of jesters in the room, as you were saying.
Well, I think it's only a matter of time before it starts to calm down. Like all this thing, it's all a phase. Like there's everything's a phase. It'll come down. It like live events, all those things will start to be more real. People will make some money off that and then it will disappear and it'll be the next big thing that comes on. But yeah, I think if you can hold on to your artistry, if you can turn around and go to sleep at night and be like, hey, I'm making authentic music that I can genuinely hang my hat on, then I think the rest will take care of itself. And I think you're doing that really well. I think that's why you've had such a long career to this point and it will continue to go. But that doesn't happen unless you make music like that. Like that's not an accident, a 10-year career plus.
Yeah, no, I appreciate the flowers, and I agree that for me, truly, it's always been about music, and I think that creating, a brand identity and social media and creating video content and stuff has become more important to me with time, and has become a huge part of my identity and my artist journey. But for me, this really has truly always been about making songs and putting them out as a means to connect with others and as a means to make other people's day better. And I think as long as that stays my goal, that no matter what the songs sound like, that I'm going to make something that I'm going to be excited about and that I'm going to want to share.
Well, the evidence is clear. And before we wrap up, I do have only one more question for you. It's the only question that I ask on the show that I actually plan. And it's probably the toughest question, but if you had to recommend one album that everybody should listen to at least once to appreciate, can be any genre of music, cannot be your own music, what would it be?
Wow. One album, any genre, not my own. Just appreciate music. That is a fantastic question. There's so many that come to mind. I would say as for something as a throwback, it would be James Blake's first album, the self-titled one. Um, I I've never heard Sonics manipulated in such an emotional way until I listened to that album. It blew my mind. It almost freaked me out. It was so good and hitting me so hard emotionally. And I just think he's a phenomenal artist, and his first album really, really blew me away. Um, Somebody new that I think I'm really blown away by is an artist that's from Milwaukee, and his name is Khalil. And he put out an album last year called The Heart. And I think it was the first album I had heard from kind of an up and coming independent artist that really had me stopped in my tracks and was like, no, I'm not supporting this kid because he's from my hometown and like we have mutual friends. There's something here, and I know it. And even in the time that I've known him, watched him go from 30 monthly listeners to tens of thousands, and had certain songs have their kind of viral moment. And um, I think he's such an interesting, eclectic artist, and it's fun to hear somebody that I think has that same radio upbringing, many genres, all being shoved into this one album. Yet there's such a cohesiveness and a distinct style there, and I think those things are really hard to balance.
Awesome. Well, I love those suggestions. Neither of those artists have been mentioned on the show, so I love that you're bringing new music to my ears, the listeners' ears. But man, it's awesome to be able to speak to you. It's awesome to be able to see the people like you exist and make music and are free to be as creative as you are, because the space of music and hip hop is only better for people like yourself being in it. So yeah, man, it's been an absolute pleasure. And for anyone who hasn't listened to the Lovers and Enemy side A album, please check it out. Side B is coming before the end of the year. There's lots of singles.
Yes,
Seattle,
sir.
the most recent. But man, is there anything else you wanted to shout out? Anything else you wanted to plug before we wrap up?
Only thing is what I say at the end of a lot of interviews. Whatever you're itching to do, just get that ball rolling. Just get it started. At one point that was music for me. I thought a million times I could write a song. I should write a song before I actually did it. And it really changed my life. So whatever you're thinking about, and the thing you can't stop thinking about, you don't have to know anything. Just say yes and get the ball rolling.
Cannot agree more.